Hey everyone, I'm your host, Quinn Magnuson. Welcome to the EOR podcast, the show for leaders, high performers, and the secrets to grit, growth, and greatness. I want to ask you something. Are you an organization looking to build a rock-solid strategy that will grow your people and end up in increased productivity and profitability? Then I invite you to start by going over to our website, effortoverresults.com, and book your free strategy call directly with me. No obligation, no bots or sticky email campaigns, just a friendly one-to-one call so I can learn more about you and your team goals. So if you're ready to get real, go over to effortoverresults.com, book your free call today. And now, let's get back to the show. Today on the EOR podcast, Ellen Raim is a forward-thinking HR specialist who does not sugarcoat what's broken in today's workplaces. With over 2 decades of experience leading HR in high-growth tech and legacy industries, Ellen challenges outdated practices, champions human-centered leadership, and isn't afraid to speak the hard truths about burnout, bias, and broken systems. She believes HR should be the conscience of the company, not just compliance cops. Ellen Raim, welcome to the EOR podcast. Let's go. Hey everybody, welcome to the Effort Over Results podcast. I'm your host, Quinn Magnuson. I'm so excited about today's conversation. Ellen and I have been talking back and forth on Facebook a little bit, and I really just love the approach she takes when it comes to people strategies and how companies should be really handling their human resources. So like I said, I want to make this a bit controversial. I want to dig deep. I want to talk about, and let's go right to what my statement was in the intro. I don't like the term HR anymore. I think it's cold, it's outdated, it's sterile, it's even the two words that are HR, human resources, it turns people into objects and to commodities, I think. I think there are HR infrastructures and things that companies need to do from an HR perspective, but the best way I could describe it is I was talking with one of my clients a year ago, and I said, well, who runs the HR in your company? And he goes, I don't have an HR person. He goes, I don't want a layer between me and my employees. And that kind of, in the moment I thought that was maybe misguided of him, because this was a $20 million company with 100 plus employees. But then it made so much more sense later on. And the more I listened to thought leaders in the HR people strategy space, and the more I developed the effort over results strategies, which is basically a people strategy, not just in business, but across all arenas, I want to ask this question. Why has the term HR lost its meaning? It's almost become a meme. It's like, oh, I'm going to tell HR about you, things like that. Like why has HR lost the trust of employees?
I think it happened a long time ago. It happened when companies decided that HR, or whatever you want to call it, the people that worked with people, were no longer advocates of the employees, but they were supposed to figure out how to use the people to be more productive and to drive strategy. And so those are two very different things. One is a helping profession. So you come to me and you say, my manager won't look me in the eye. I don't know what to do. I don't know if he's mad at me. I don't know how to fix that. That's being helpful to the individual employee. And the other is, we're about to grow and we need to hire 75 more people in a month and a half. You go out and you figure out who those people should be and where to find them. Or we're about to launch this interesting new project and we have to figure out exactly what that means in terms of who needs what skill and what we're going to do there. Or we have a turnover problem. What are we going to do? So HR, through the arc of my career, stopped being the employee advocates and started being a strategic enabler of the business. So if you think about a business, it's got machines and it's got finances and it's got people. And so figuring out how to direct those people systems to enable the strategy. And that's not a bad thing. In fact, it's probably a very, very good thing. But no one wanted to grow the HR department so that it would do both. And so it has shifted over the years to being a strategic enabler, not paying attention to the folks inside the organization individually. And so then the only time that HR gets involved with individuals is either coaching managers who are not performing or helping managers coach out employees who aren't performing. So it really has changed. You're 100% right.
I'm so disappointed that it has changed so much. Now, I've only really experienced an HR department in my most recent career, but it was 15 years. And I mean, I think for the most part, there are some good intentions, but there's such a gray area, blurred lines between truly helping people and there being people strategies, and like you said, that then the company strategy of growing revenue and profitability through their people, and where that line is, it's really tough to tell, and every company is a little bit different. And when you had said about how HR used to be this and now has become this, it almost reminds me of the way unions used to be. Like, unions were basically formed to help the laborers because they were being overworked, long hours, and so forth. And then all of a sudden unions came in to help that, and now it's gone to the other end of the pendulum, and it's turned into something negative. So why do something that's always frustrated me over the years is companies that say people are our greatest asset and then don't follow through on that. Like, it's just virtue signaling, and the amount of virtue signaling I see from companies today about how people are their greatest asset and how their values, the mission, vision, and values are up on the wall, and people are up there in the top three about how our people and our customers are so important. Why has that just been so watered down, and it almost becomes, like I said before, like a meme?
Because it's easy to say and very hard to do. But I do believe that the early career professionals that are joining the workforce right now, the Gen Z folks, they are very mission driven and they have very, very strong expectations about what a company should be in terms of their culture and their ethos. And I think if there's any chance of pulling it back to being real, when you say people are our greatest asset, this generation's going to help make that happen. Um, what we've seen instead, I think, is change is really hard and change is really scary. And the people at the top, they're just people too. And so, faced with all of the turmoil and the uncertainty that's been going on in the world, I think it's easier for the people at the top to retreat back to what they know. So if you think about after COVID, everybody had to go home and work from home, and every company figured out how to do that. And then all of a sudden, the senior leadership got really nervous, and they're forcing everybody back into the office. And so the reason is not because the productivity dropped. It didn't drop. The reason is because you have to learn a new way to manage. You have to learn a new way to motivate. You have to learn how to do everything completely differently. So I think in senior leadership's mind, it's easier to try to bend everyone to the will of how the operation operates than it is to try to really enable and empower the employees.
And I think if there is you know, quote unquote HR department, whether that be one person who's just leading that charge or maybe there's a full-on department, they are going to reflect by far the attitudes of leadership and of the company more so than the protection of the employees. Like we talked about just before the show, it's like they're not there to represent the employees. They say they are, and they say that, if there's a problem, come to your HR representative. But really, HR is just reflecting what leadership is telling them. So everything still boils down to and is modeled from leadership. It's
Yeah.
from the CEO through the C-suite through the leadership teams that HR takes their cues and they're told how to operate. Sure,
Yeah.
they
I
have
mean,
the yeah. Go
yeah.
ahead.
I cut you off. No, go ahead.
Well,
Um,
no, I didn't have much to add to that. It really just is leadership modeling, and HR follows.
yeah. My very first HR job. So I started as an employment lawyer, and I saw when people got so frustrated and so upset that they would sue their employer. And then they ended up in the lawyer's office, and it took a year for anything to settle out. And I decided, that felt to me like it was I was the guy with the broom at the end of the parade, just sort of sweeping up after the horses. And
Yeah.
that really did not feel like I was adding any value. So I went inside of a company and I wanted to try to make the culture better so that people didn't sue. But I started out as a lawyer inside of a company, and that really wasn't that much better because you think people don't like HR, people don't like the lawyers either. So I did that, and then I switched into HR. And when I first switched into HR, my very first HR mentor said to me, you know, Ellen, you need at least 3 months' salary saved up, because if you are doing this right, you are going to get crosswise with leadership because you are going to advocate for a position and they're not going to want it. And so you may reach a point where you want to part ways. So you need like a kitty of money saved, because you're going to come to a point where, you know, it's going to be, are you in your integrity or out of your integrity? And so I've always tried to run my career like that. But I think that you are right. When you think about it, the internal HR department, their salaries are paid for by the system. And so they have to be at some level part of the system.
Yeah. I I have yet to encounter an HR leader or department that fully has control of what they would like to do. Like I said before, the senior leadership, the CEO and the C-suite are really what control it. Getting back to the legal aspect of things, I'm glad to hear you have some employment law experience, because I'd like to get into this a little bit deeper, is that when it gets to a point where an employee has now sought legal counsel and now is suing the company or seeking some form of damages, whatever it is, it seems to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ellen, it seems to me that this is something that could have been avoided. And in most cases, it could have been just a conversation that could have avoided all this. It is leadership taking down the fourth wall a little bit and going to that particular employee and asking them truly, like, okay, can we try to work this out? What is truly bothering you? Like, what is and this is where leadership, I think, fails in a lot of cases. Now, we're going to get into the boomer slash Gen Z conflict in a second, but it's really just being curious about why your employees are upset. And I
Yeah.
think if those conversations happen, even if it's just the supervisor that's having that conversation or the manager who represents leadership, those conversations need to be had. But nobody wants to have those extra conversations. And this is something I regret in my days even as a teacher, and this is 20 years ago, where I should have understood my students better. But I was just trying to like hammer them with like, deadlines and homework and whatever. But the same thing happens in employment situations. Leaders don't want to take the time to figure things out.
Yeah, interesting what you said. And let me riff on what you're saying.
Yeah.
So tomorrow I am doing a presentation for my alma mater to alumni 1 to 5 years out of school. So junior jump ups inside of a company in terms of their knowledge base. And I am, during this presentation, talking about what I think are a couple of fundamental workplace truths. And they match a little bit to what you're saying, slightly different. One is when they make a lot of revenue, when they sell a lot of product or a lot of service. And so there is constantly a tension between employee productivity and employee experience. So said another way, how well employees feel, how good they feel about their jobs is not always top of mind. And then the second fundamental workplace truth around the same idea is managers are judged for their output according to what the business goals are and not for how well they manage. So they may be lovely people, but they've never been taught how to be good managers. So, you said they don't want to take the time. It
Yeah.
might be they
They
don't
don't
know
have,
what to say if they do take. They're
or they don't
just,
have the time.
or they don't have the time. They've just never been trained. And that's not when they get their performance review, and which their raise is based on. Usually there's not a section on how well did you manage your employees. So it's a systems problem. It may be an individual, there might be an evil manager or two stuck inside the company, but I think it's bigger than that. It's a systems problem. So given that, That's the piece that's missing inside of that's missing inside of a company. Training the managers to understand how to care about somebody individually without, crossing too much into their personal life, understanding how to motivate somebody so they want to work hard and they want to grow. Those are hard skills to teach. You have to make the time to teach them. And like you said earlier, you have to follow up enough to make sure it's working okay. And that's not where, in times like today, where funds are tight and business is uncertain, that's not where the money goes.
Yeah. And I think there is a misinterpretation of the message of what that means and looks like. So when we say caring for your employees and truly trying to understand what's going on, their backstory, or asking them, sitting down and truly asking them, what the issue is, what their concerns are. I think leadership, and I'm pointing the finger at boomers. Sorry, boomers, and even some Gen X. So I'll point at myself too. I think they interpret that as kowtowing and hand holding and coddling, mollycoddling, um, their employees. And well, if we're just going to give them everything and we're just going to like treat them like little babies that, just get we attune to their every whim, we lose. And that's just not the way. They need to, grow a thicker skin. That's not what it means.
No, that's
And
not what it means. And what you just described, so you're 100% right in what you
yeah.
just described. Um, Gen X as well, boomers too, but boomers, the youngest boomer's 61 now, so 61 and a half.
Yeah.
So they are pretty much retiring out of the workplace. So it's Gen X that's in charge. And Gen X was raised very, very, very similar to boomers, where they were, I don't know what it was like where you
We're the
grew up. Where I
crossover. We're
grew up.
kind of that nice crossover between boomers and millennials, Like we were the first generation to have the internet but not have the internet, right? So go ahead, sorry.
But we weren't supervised the way that millennials and
Right.
Gen Z are. So we got thrown. I don't know what it was like growing up in your house, but in my house, both my parents worked. And so when they got home, they just wanted to detox. And so they were like, go outside and play. Come home when the
Yep.
streetlights come on.
Yep.
Same thing on the weekends. And there were no cell phones. And so there were no bike helmets, were no seat belts.
We were
So
the feral children of the streets.
right. So we had to learn how to figure things out ourselves.
Yeah.
And we also had to learn grace under pressure, because somebody, if you were traveling in a pack of kids, somebody fell off their bike all the time, or somebody got hurt, or somebody got left behind. And you had to figure that out and deal with it yourself. And so that's the mindset that Gen X brings and boomers bring into the workplace. And so you're very right. There's a need to change mindsets. And if the leadership isn't going to change their mindset, it becomes incumbent upon the generations below to gently figure out how to help them change their way of thinking. And then also people like you and I, who can come into the workplace and train and lecture and advise on how to make things better.
Yeah. And here's the thing, and boomers, I hope you're listening, that I understand why you are the way you are. Like we understand the generation you grew up in. You were being led by the silent generation. And I would even suggest going back to the turn of the Industrial Revolution. I mean, every generation said about the generation that was younger, they have no work ethic. I mean, it's actually been proven now through newspaper clippings and so forth. But boomers are the way they are because that's how they were treated. And so then they treated their employees, us, the Gen Xers, in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, the way that they were treated. And it was basically a do it or else mentality. And you didn't get a bonus. The bonus was you're getting a paycheck. There was leave your baggage at the door. I don't want to hear about you broke up with your girlfriend or you're having a bad day at school. Like that just didn't happen. And it has taken, and this is where I'll give millennials and Gen Z especially some props. They just said, we'll walk. Sorry, we're going to walk. We can find other ways to make money. A lot of them don't even, it seems to me, and maybe I'm wrong, and I'm going to interview my kids on the podcast one day, but it's like They don't need to make a ton of money. That's not what they're seeking. So back when I would work, it was like, hey, do you want some overtime? Heck yeah, I want overtime. I want to make some more money to pay for the car when I turn 16 and I can drive, to be able to go to the bars when I'm 19, 21 in the States, and things like that. There was a almost like a step-by-step process of life, and you needed to earn money for that. You wanted to get out of your parents' house as fast as possible. The problem with that is that then Gen X parents became the coddlers of their own children, and we turned these Gen Z children, this generation, into ones that don't leave the house. They don't really need a lot of money. They are pretty, fairly resourceful. How do we bridge the gap between the boomers that are still hanging on and still leading companies and the Gen Zs and now Gen Alpha at some point? But how do we bridge that gap? Because there is so wide a mindset gap between those two generations as far as employers and employees than ever before.
Yeah. So I'm going to start responding to all of the things that you just said.
Yeah, sorry.
I'll get to the part about how to close the gap.
Let's do it.
So one of the big differences between the generation that's starting in the workplace and us was we were sold or we were given a social contract that said, work hard and you will be rewarded. So I knew that if I worked really, really hard and I paid my dues, I would climb the ladder and I would eventually make, enough money to have a car, a dog, a house, a couple of kids, a vacation. That social contract it's very wobbly right now.
Yep.
Price of things compared to the rate of increase in salaries, it's upside down. It's gotten, the gap has gotten so wide that I don't believe that Gen Z is sure that they'll ever have the dreams of like home ownership, et cetera. And so they are looking for ways to make their lives feel useful. And, you said earlier that they don't go after money the same way. Stuff I've read says that they are worried about money, but what they're very good at that none of us ever tried was to have a side gig at the same time that they might have a job, because they're trying to put their eggs in more than one basket. So I think we got with the program, and the program was work really hard. I mean, that's what you were told, work really hard and you will be rewarded. So I think what happened, back to what you were saying about how we raised our own children. So I also have a Gen Z child. I think in reaction to the way that we were treated, we tried to make some changes. And so we made a bunch of changes. I think our kids had childhoods and early adulthoods that were nicer than the way that we were raised. None of us saw any of the consequences that were coming in work. And those consequences are coming because Gen X is still in charge, thinking about work the way that they were always taught, and because the economy is not as vibrant as it was 70s, 80s, 90s when we were coming up. So that's what I think is the context. So what do you do about it? I think you have to get both sides to understand that they've got to get away from judging and blaming. And so right now, Gen Z, the termination percentages of Gen Z in the workplace, much higher than any other generation ever, because they're much different to the leadership generation, and they're annoying them, and they think, I can't deal with this. I don't want to deal with this. I'm going to fire the employee. So they're being fired in much greater numbers. And that's not okay. And so how I appeal to the businesses is I say, by 2030, Gen Z will be 35% of the worldwide workforce. That's not nothing. And right now, there's a lot of layoffs going on in tech companies all over the world. And you can absorb some of those people who already know what they're doing, who come from an earlier generation, and it's going to make you feel okay. But eventually you're not going to be able to. So you better figure out how to fix this. And I know you have all kinds of other issues right now, like AI and tariffs and all the things, but you're going to turn around and your only solution to this is going to be, I can't work with these folks, so I'm firing them. And that's not a sustainable business model. So that's what I say to that side. And then to the other side, I say, you want to understand how to play the game. Right now, the workforce has these unwritten rules that are left over from when we were coming up. You want to understand how to play the game. And when you understand what the rules are, you can either play them or not. There are many, many successful solopreneurs starting at, kids who've graduated from high school at 18 and are still and started their own businesses. But if you want to work inside the system, you have to understand how the people think and the unwritten rules about how you get ahead. Spoiler alert, a lot of those rules about how you get ahead are really understanding how the people think and building trusted relationships with them, because they're just people too. So I have models that I teach people for how you approach people with non-judgmental curiosity and not blaming, but it's going to take a while. People have to want to change.
Yeah, you said it. You nailed it on the head right there. It really just is. People need to want to change. And, the more I hear from Boomer and Gen X owners, like, there's a Gen Z problem and yet there's a labor shortage. It's every generation of business owners. And I'm gonna take this outside of business too. You're coaching a youth team, you're teaching in a classroom, you're parenting your own children. And this is where effort over results transcends just business too, because it really all of what we're talking about today, Ellen, it does transcend business. How do I raise my own children? How do I deal when I'm coaching a sports team of Gen Z kids? It's all part and parcel of how we live, but you need to want to change. And I only came across that 4 years ago. I'm 54, and at the age of 49, 50, and I think it happened during COVID, to be honest. It just kind of dawned on me, like the way I was, and I'm not a bad father, but the way I was raising my kids just wasn't good for them. And this is what business owners need to realize. It's like you're not giving away, any trade secrets. Your company's not going to fail because you showed some compassion and vulnerability as a leader.
Yeah.
The days of being that dictatorial business owner, dictatorial parent, coach, teacher, gone. Doesn't work. And maybe in some fields it does, but it doesn't work in those for the most part. And you're right. Bosses, employers, leaders, supervisors, what do you want to call them, need to change the way they think. And what I love about this is if you do look back into the mid 20th century, 50s, 60s, 70s, there were people like that. There were people leading companies back then with compassion, with psychological safety in mind before that was even a term. And they succeeded heavily. There were companies that also had those dictators that also succeeded because you could do that back then. But I love what you said about that. We as the older generation need to suck it up and change the way we think, because the rules, they're broken. They're gone. They don't exist anymore.
Yeah, and you said something really interesting, which most people don't know, which is if you look back at like some of the companies that are really big but have been around for a long time, like IBM, they had they had school for people, they had daycare centers, they had, like choirs, they
Yeah.
had all these things that made people, that enriched their employees and made them want to stay. And people stayed. They stayed 40 years and then got their gold watch when they left. And that wasn't because there weren't other jobs available. And
It was a great environment, and they figured it out, but they were one of a few, right?
and
And
also
now
I
you
think
have
what
this.
happened Also, I think what happened is if you look at the history against the economic environment, so if you overlay those two things, there got to be a point in time when things got tight and somebody in the finance department said, "Oh wow, look, if we get rid of the learning and development department, if we get rid of the company choir, if we get rid of the free lunches,
Yeah.
um, then we'll have more profit. We'll have less operating expense." And they did, and those things have been missing since probably, I don't know what, the fees or the fees.
Yeah.
It's time for them to come back. And I'm team Gen Z, and I think it's time for that stuff to come back, and somebody's got to bring it back.
Yeah, I do think that they still need to be led with structure. I think Gen Z still wants structure. I still think they embrace routine, but it's how it's packaged and it's the environment that it's within. I even know in coaching young athletes, or even my son and daughter who went down to the States on athletic scholarships, the way they're marketing athletics in the States now with NCAA schools to get kids, like to recruit kids, is far different than when I got recruited. When I got recruited, it's like, here's the weight room, here's the stadium, we're a pretty good program, do you want to come and play for us? When my kids got recruited, especially my son, it was like, look at our $75 million weight room. And there's a barber shop and there's a games room and there's like basically it was just, a fun land for these kids, because that's what they want. They want to feel like they're going to their new home every day when they go to school. And this is what companies need to do. I know there's an extra expense there, but it boggles my mind, Ellen, that this is a study done by a group in Canada here about 5 years ago. And it was, what is the number one problem you think you will face as a business owner after COVID? And they said the labor shortage and HR issues. Okay, great. So that's the number one thing they know they're going to face, and it's really on top of mind. Then they polled them basically within the same poll on, where are you going to spend your resources? Where are you going to focus your efforts on in the next 5 years in terms of your company? And those same problems came in dead last, 9 out of 10. I don't get it. Your people are everything. Now, some companies, maybe they run on more AI now, maybe they've automated some things. That's fine. But anybody with at least 2 employees should be taking those 2 employees very seriously, because there's not a lot of them out there. They're not going to stay for very long. And if you don't treat them with respect and try to grow them through a psychologically safe environment, the turnover rates, through the roof.
Right. 100%. And it's very short-sighted not to pay attention to your employees. And this has to do with all employees at all levels and
Yeah.
all ages and all generations.
Yeah.
It's very short-sighted not to pay attention to your employees, because the cost of turnover is about 130% of someone's salary by the time you have, the work is lying fallow until you find somebody new, and then you find somebody new, you spend all the money recruiting them, and then they've got to come up to speed. It makes a lot more sense to be able to engage and make an existing employee loyal.
What a great
And
soundbite. Just what you said there, the last 30 seconds, like that's basically it. It's like 130%, but you can't see it. And if you physically can't show someone on a financial report, like, well, because this employee left, your costs went up 130%. There's no way to really physically and tangibly show them that, and so they just go, well, we'll just replace them. That's
yes,
that's that's another one where they keep ignoring. Another, just, it's a universal truth, but they just keep ignoring it.
yes, there's um just, kind of goes back to what I said earlier about, as you as you become a manager and all the way as you climb the corporate ladder, you may not get any training or insight into understanding how people tick or how your employees make your business run. And so you can reach a C-suite with a whole bunch of people who are looking at the financials and never thinking, I actually need the people inside of this company to build whatever it is we build. And that's the way we get stuff done. They stop at the market size is this, and we've got a great product, yay. And it happens catch as catch can. And it's sometimes that works, and a lot of times it doesn't. It ought to be easier. So the trade-off, one of the trade-offs is the bigger you are, the more resources you have to throw at something, right? So you can buy fancy learning and development systems, and you can throw big retreats, and you can put free food in the break room. But when you're smaller, you can have deeper interactions
Yeah.
and closer relationships.
Yeah.
And one of the things that, again, I think everybody craves, but it's been said that Gen Z craves a lot, is to understand why. Explain to me why you're doing this. What's the company's motivation? What happens if you do it? What's the plan B if it doesn't? And those things are usually not shared. When I was taught in HR, you are taught there is a need to know group on everything, and you keep that need to know group as small as possible.
Yeah.
Now, there are some things that you can't tell everybody. So, if you're about to go public, you can't tell that to the world, or your things that would affect the stock price or the insider trading, but you can tell employees a lot more than I think most companies do, and that's free. It just takes time.
And the smart companies, and don't get me wrong, there's a lot of them out there that are doing what you and I are talking about, and they're thriving from it. But the smart companies are the ones who are hiring, the Ellen Raims of the world, effort over results, Quinn Magnusons of the world, because they're like, we need to get better, and we don't understand this, so we need to get someone in to help us understand it. And I applaud those companies that bring in third party consultation, coaching, whatever you want. And the people I feel this most empathy for, Ellen, are the middle management, the supervisors, managers, that are below C-suite but above the employees, because they're caught between a rock and a hard place. Some of them probably want to be those compassionate, psychologically safe environment builders of the company, but they also have metrics, and they also have numbers they need to hit. And I've seen it firsthand, this happen, leaders changing literally the way they've led for 4, 10, however many years, because all of a sudden now a new leader comes in over top of them and puts their foot on their neck and says, no, we need to start making money. We need to start being more profitable and productive. So you need to get your group to step up. One of the funniest things that I keep getting reminded of, and it's a scene from The Simpsons, and I don't know if you've seen it. It's when Homer Simpson becomes the union rep for the staff at the nuclear plant. And I'm hoping I can cut this clip into the episode, but he basically goes to Mr. Burns and Mr. Burns says to him, "What is it that you want?" That's my best Mr. Burns impression. And Homer's like, "Well, we'd like more tartar sauce on Fridays in the cafeteria." And Smithers turns to Burns something like this, and he goes, "That costs like $1.78 a week." And then Burns goes, "Give them their tartar sauce." And it changes the entire culture, because they asked. It's not about the tartar sauce. It's the fact that the leadership asked the employees, what is it that would make your lives a little bit better? What is it that would make, coming to work a little bit, more enjoyable for you? Not having the Sunday scaries to be able to come in Monday morning and walk through that door with a smile on your face. It's the tartar sauce. It could be something so simple. But this is what I was saying earlier, Ellen, is that leadership seems to think it's these wide, sweeping, costly changes to make Gen Z happy. And it's like, it's not. There can be some very cost effective, if not completely free, ways of making your employees feel better about coming to work on Monday morning.
Right. And I don't even think, for the leaders in charge right now that are so ingrained in the concepts of productivity and revenue, I don't even think you have to say it that way. I don't even think you have to say this will make your employees happy. I think you can say this will make your employees more engaged, and more engaged employees do a better job. And so that's true. They're engaged because they're happy. But I think you can even say it in business language to make people understand that it's something necessary. And that's one of the reasons, honestly, that I decided I didn't want to work for one company anymore, because I'd really like to spread the word on some of this stuff. And as a consultant, I have the opportunity to talk to more than one company in my new career, because these are messages I think everyone needs to get. I think that the tougher the economy gets, the tougher the environment gets, the more uncertain, the greater your opportunity to thrive is by focusing on your employees.
And when I am working with companies, or even when I'm just trying to present the concept of having an effort over results culture built, and that's what I've named it. You can call it whatever you want, but basically it's praise your employees for the work, the hard work they put in, praise the effort. You still want results. Don't get me wrong, people. I'm not saying results don't matter. I'm a results guy myself, but I also don't obsess over it anymore, because when you obsess over the result, you lose context of everything between A and Z that happened, the hard work that went into it, the celebratory small little wins each day, the getting 1% better every day. But when you create a psychologically safe environment, one, two, an environment where your employees are recognized for the effort more so than just whether they obtained a result, finished a project, won a contract, whatever, the stats don't lie. And I have the stats right in front of me. Employee engagement goes up to almost 45%.
Well,
Innovation and output, 36% increase. Reduction of burnout, 27% down. The retention of talent is upwards of 50% or more. But companies ignore this. And here's the thing. You can lead a horse to water, you can't make it drink. Some companies will continue to ignore it. Fine. Go ahead. Burn through people, burn through resources and financial resources because of your fixed mindset. That's fine. There are companies out there that want to get better, and they will approach you. They will approach me. They will approach other coaches, consultants to help them build a culture, because in 2035, the Gen Z friendly culture will just be the norm,
I think so. I mean, I think so. It's a long time to wait. It would be nice if
right?
if we,
Maybe I went too
we
far
could
out.
push
10
this
years?
forward a
Gosh.
little faster. But I think that business is at an inflection point. I think you can't keep running companies where your solution to balance, to balance your budget is to lay off a bunch of people. It's not going to work forever. It's not a sustainable business model, and it certainly doesn't do you well to sell your product, because every single person that's gotten terminated because you did a layoff is out telling their friends and their cousins and their grandparents not to buy the product. So it's it's really, the time is right to focus on employees individually again.
Yeah. So let's go back to one of the big banner topics that we were going to talk about, and that is the quote unquote Gen Z problem that boomers like to throw out there: lack of work ethic, and they don't stick around, and their resumes show 10 different places they've worked at in the last year. And it's funny, I when I was interviewed 15 years ago for the career job that I had, they said, "Well, I've noticed, you haven't stayed longer, or you haven't stayed any longer than 5 years at any place." Now that would be glorious to business owners to see a 5-year tenure for anybody at anywhere. Now it seems to be that 1 to 2 years is the norm, especially for Gen Z, right? Because they're trying to find a place that suits their values, that suits their needs. So what is quote unquote the Gen Z problem? Let's define that as you see it, being an HR professional, and let's talk about why there isn't one.
So I wouldn't call it a problem. I would call it a gap.
Yep.
And because it's a problem, if you decide you don't want to do anything about it, it's a gap if you're going to make a commitment to try to close it. But the gap is a difference in values, which, let me back up and say, there's a difference in the skill set that Gen Z brings to the workplace. So there are skills that some businesses expected Gen Z to have that they don't have now when they're joining. There's a difference in values, and there's a unwillingness on either side to figure out how to bring the sides together.
Yep.
So a little bit more detail on each one. So Gen Z, the oldest Gen Z right now is just turned 27. So they've only been out of school 3 or 4 years. They came up during COVID. And so I know, for example, with my own daughter, she had marvelous summer internships from the back bedroom, right? So she had a job in Washington, D.C. from the back bedroom. So they didn't get the interaction with people in an office. And so if you think about how you learned, we learned, right? Before COVID, people learned by watching others, right? So you'd see somebody and go, oh, look, that seems to work. Or, oh, that person just kind of got in trouble, so I'm not going to do that. That wasn't available. You don't get that on Zoom. You don't get that when every single meeting is got to be organized and
Yep.
set up. So they are missing some of the what people call the soft skills, the social skills. Also, if you have been around this cohort, you know that they're much more comfortable with text than they are with talking to people in person. And so that's also missing. And there are some office etiquette things that really drive people nuts that are also missing. So what's proper office attire where you are, what's those kinds of things that are really insignificant but
Yeah.
really annoy the older generations and create a gap. So that's soft skills. Hard skills, they come in with more hard skills in terms of anything digital and anything tech than most people that are in the workplace right now, except for maybe your IT department. But they're junior. And I think people have forgotten that when you hire somebody into a job that's an entry level job, they have entry level experience. So that's another point of contention. And then, as we talked about earlier, they want to build a work life balance that we just didn't have a separation between work and not work.
Yep.
And people put all kinds of labels on that. You're lazy, you're not committed, you don't understand that Gen Z is lazy or not committed. I think that they're looking for more balance. And you read earlier statistics about burnout. I looked at the statistics on burnout this morning too, and there's burnout all the way through the company, and the numbers are not that different. So while millennials and Gen Z, their feeling of burnout, when you ask them, do they feel burned out, is in the 50% range. For folks higher up the ladder, it's in the high 30s. So the systems that we've built are not great for people. So that's the points of contention are mostly around what I would call soft skills or behavioral things. And what I hear most often are they're lazy because they want work-life balance. They want to be able to shut off at night and not work all weekend. They're not committed because they want to send me an email and they don't want to like come into my office and talk to me. They think that they want to be promoted immediately and they need to pay their dues. So those are the kinds of things I hear. And I think this is it's mostly naivete. I think if we would take the time to explain to Gen Z employees the kind of unwritten rules there are in the workplace, that a lot of them would be fine. It takes time and it takes mindset changes, but I don't think I think people are calling it a problem because they're anchored in the way they've always thought, and they're not putting the time in to understand the value of what this new cohort is bringing into the workplace.
Yeah, they're at the end of their either business ownership careers or just careers in general, maybe as leaders, C-suite managers, supervisors, and they just I'm too old, as they would say, I'm too old for this, right? You mentioned communication, and this is something I want to look at for a second because I keep reminding people that the approach that effort over results takes transcends business. And here's the example I'm going to give. You just talked about instructing that employee to go and talk to her boss. And so there was a conversation there. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that conversation is going to turn out really good. I mean, the boss still could be a jerk and make a problem of it, but at least the effort was made to have a conversation, whether it be the boss going to the employee or vice versa. When I was teaching, it's the same thing. If a student who, maybe was struggling or, didn't like the way I was teaching or found the workload too heavy, if they were to, put their hand up in class and question me in front of the rest of the quote unquote employees, students, I was less likely to be forgiving and empathetic in that moment. But when a student would come to me after class and is just one-to-one and they said, me and my classmates are saying that, this workload is really heavy and we're just wondering if, if there'd be a way to take a break or a different way. I would treat that so differently because I felt it was respectful, it was mature, and they explained themselves well. Same thing as a parent. If you just yell back at me in front of your brothers and sisters, siblings, whatever, and you're just trying to be defiant, well, I'm going to treat you differently than if you pull me aside and say, hey, dad, can we just have a chat for a second? And you're mature about it and you have a good conversation. So communication is critical in all situations where there is a form of leadership and a form of, let's call it employees slash student, child, athlete even. Do you think that's true?
I do think that's true. I think there's a responsibility on the person in the superordinate position to explain why they're giving you input and feedback. So I think it's really important for them to say, I'm giving you input and feedback because I believe in you and I want to see you grow, or I'm giving you feedback because I know you can do a good job. You might just not know this, because I think it's really important in the way that we respond to hear that you believe in us. There's a chance. We're part of the team. It's going to work out okay. I think it's much easier to accept feedback and work on it.
So we discussed, the definition of the Gen Z problem, and I like how you changed the word problem to there's a gap there, and that's the question I'd actually asked earlier: is how do we now bridge this gap? But I think if you wanted to give it two or three things, one is better communication. I think there needs to be more one-to-one communication between leaders and the employees. I think two, managers need to be better trained and prepared for this and not just thrown into the fire, because the majority of those managers are probably Gen Xers, if not older millennials, that are in those management and caught between the rock and the hard place of senior leadership and the employees themselves, the people that are they're leading. So there needs to be better training there. And I think above all, if a leadership team just strives to have a psychologically safe workplace, you can, those three things, there is no problem.
I agree with you.
And Gen Z, I'm not even an HR professional and I see this. And Gen Z will appreciate that. Well, you said it prior to the show, Ellen. My kids have basically shown me the light. I've had a come to Jesus moment where my kids have basically explained to me how they think, how they operate, what they're truly looking for in a workplace. My daughter especially, and it's been wonderful. And I never thought I ever would have come to this place where, because 10 years ago, I would have been like, suck it up, princess. Like, go to work, be on time. If you're not, if you're early, you're on time. If you're on time, you're late. And if you're late, you're fired. That whole mentality. And I've been just opened up to so many beautiful ways of how to handle things now by the Gen Z generation. And I'm fortunate to have kids who are that age. But that's the thing, is that boomers don't, I mean, those are almost their grandkids in some cases. But yeah, there's that gap there. But those three things: communication, hiring or training your managers better, and then psychologically safe workplaces.
Yeah. Two things just to add to what you're saying. I think your 3 points are right on. Just two interesting things. One is, when I was coming up in my first legal job, I was not happy. And I remember having lunch with my father. And my father said, show me the memo they sent you that said you're supposed to like your job. You do your job because it pays you and it gives you respect and it gives you freedom and it gives you intellectual stimulation. And there's nothing on that list that says it gives you happiness. So I went back and I practiced law for a whole lot longer because I thought, respect my dad. I guess you can't really be fulfilled and happy at your job. So just to give you an idea of the leadership in charge right now, that's how I was thinking. Yep. And when I was first coming up, until those scales were removed from my eyes. And then the second point that I wanted to make about what you said was, it's very, very important for the leadership to get their aha moment about what's important to this younger generation and how they think. And so there's a few enlightened companies that are trying what they call reverse mentoring. So they hook up a senior person with an entering young professional, and they don't have the senior person, talk at the younger person, wave their finger in front of their face, but they pick topics where the younger person can share their values and also some of the things they know. So there are apps for everything. There is AI for everything now. So there's the way that you market now is completely different because there's so much of it is digital. So really learning and understanding the junior employees' perspectives is going to be a business accelerator. And so I think that's a really interesting way to do it, is to try to set up some of these reverse mentorship programs.
I love that idea. I actually, one of my podcasts a few weeks ago was on mentorship, and not necessarily just in business, but in just in life in general, and the experience that the older generations can bring, but learning from the younger generations too. And it's having that open mind of and I want to go back to something I said earlier. People who are, let's say Gen Xers, boomers, showing vulnerability is not weakness. Showing that you don't know something is not a weakness. But unfortunately, that's the way we were raised. Our generation was raised. It was like, well, if men don't cry. And if you say, I don't know how to do this, you're showing weakness. So you just act like you know how to do it, you fake it to me, or whatever it is. And that's the one thing that I think this generation, and I when I say this, I mean Gen Zs, are showing us that it's okay, you know, you know, alpha male, alpha female, boss person, to show that, you don't know everything. You don't have to be Superman or Superwoman to us. You just got to show that you care.
I
And
think it's not, I would add to vulnerability, I would add transparency.
yeah,
It's not a problem to 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 share.
but once again, it's generational. I mean, the generation gap, like I said before, is as wide as it's ever been in terms of the way Gen Z thinks and how they're going to act and respond with their feet in certain situations than any generation prior to them. The millennials are kind of caught in the middle. They're not sure what to do. Gen X is kind of caught in the middle to a certain point, but we're also, we grew up in a generation where it was like what your father said. It's like, listen, you have a job, do your job. Suck it up, princess, that sort of mentality. And this will all in 10 years, who knows what this will look like.
Aren't you excited to sit around and
Kind
like,
of
well,
am.
not sit around, participate in, and then see where it ends up? I can't wait to see, and I'm very hopeful that we change the paradigm,
Yeah.
because it needs to be changed.
This is the whole purpose well, I would say the 90% of the episodes we do on the podcast here, it's to get people to see other viewpoints, especially when it comes to the generation gaps and how we communicate with each other. The motivation and impetus, like you said prior to the show, and thank you, that was the greatest compliment I could have received, is for Effort Over Results, and the brand I'm building isn't something I'm doing in retirement to make more money. It's something I'm doing in retirement because I truly believe it, and I want to bring this message to not only our audience who are listening today, but to anybody who sees what I post on LinkedIn or anywhere, that there's a whole world out there of things that we can become better for, from, and at. It's just a matter of opening your mind a little bit and being willing to see things, through other people's eyes. And I think that's where the boomer Gen Z thing is. It's really just getting together and understanding each other. So let me start to wrap things up here, Ellen. You know what? I love the fact that we're actually well over an hour, and I haven't even thought like it's an hour. It's been incredibly, a great conversation. So if you, as an HR professional, if you had to reinvent HR from scratch tomorrow and bring that to the world, what stays? What do you burn to the ground?
I think there's a part of HR that's HR operations that has to stay, right? The paychecks have to go out, they have to be accurate, you need
Would
benefits.
you give that a different name? Because like I said, I hate the term HR when it comes to, okay, we have payroll and hiring and, and onboarding and all that, but HR still, to me, would you change the name, or is it just fine the way it is?
I'm happy for you to name it whatever
Okay, well, sure.
so there's
Keep going. Yeah.
that's the operations of the organization. Um, and I think there is a role for where HR has migrated, which is the strategic enabler of the business. So looking for trends and looking for what are the new programs to bring in because of the stage where the business is. What I think needs to be reinserted and emphasized is learning and development and individual coaching. So could be coaching for managers on how to manage better, could be individual coaching for employees on how to function better. And if you did all of that, then hopefully you would get the C-suite to create the environment that you've been talking about, which is, a safe space and, people first environment, because tone from the top will kill this if it's not there. So I can tell you all the things that you could put into an HR department, but we're herd-like creatures, right? And if the alpha in the herd thinks something is stupid, nobody else is going to do it either. They're not going to spend the time. And so if you're building this culture where you're helping everybody see that working on employee stuff is not separate from the business, but it actually drives the business, then I think you can get tone from the top. And then you could have this third chunk of HR that is often very disconnected or not there at all, which is learning and development and coaching.
Maybe we could change the name human resources to biological operations, right? And we'll call it
Well, they're now
BO.
calling it, some
I'm
people
the
are
director of
calling
BO.
some people are calling it chief people operations. Like,
Yep.
I don't think the words matter. I don't think, well, let me say it a different way. I don't think changing the words without changing the mindset, without changing the ethos, without changing the direction is going to make as much of a difference as working on.
But I think where sorry, I'm going down a rabbit hole, but I think where I have the problem with the term human resources is because resources implies something that's expendable or
Yeah.
consumable.
Yeah.
Financial resources, we spend money, we make money. Human resources, we hire people, we fire people. We have lots of turnover, burnout,
Mhm.
right? That's why I don't like the term human resources. They're humans, but they're just a resource that we go through and we burn through them, we expend them, we and then we hire more to burn through and expend and whatever. And that's why I think I don't like the term.
There was a period of time when it was called human capital, and I think that's even worse. That
Yeah,
really
now
does
we're a
feel poor.
spreadsheet. Now people are spreadsheets. You know what? We missed a topic and I'm going to go into it. Sorry. It's too hot a topic to not talk about. DEI. And the reason why I want to talk about it is because I'll ask you a direct question. Where does DEI go wrong? And when I say go wrong, I'm not implying that I don't think it's a good idea. I fully support DEI. But where does it go wrong in the way it's quote unquote marketed to companies who are, feel like it's almost like a necessary evil? Where does DEI go wrong that it doesn't make it palatable, especially to say boomers and Gen X owners?
Let me try to answer that inside out. Let me try
Yeah.
to say how I think it works or where it goes right.
Yeah, I know. It's a loaded question. Sorry for that.
Yeah. Well, even to get to your answer, I would have to figure out how it goes right. So let me try that first. Each one of us is unique, and each one of us brings different strengths and weaknesses into the workplace. And the workplace is, a company is a legal fiction, right? A company is created like, you create a organization just so that it can buy things and be sued. And so it's a company is not a thing. Really, what it is an amalgamation of people that have to be motivated together and engaged together and operate well enough that they are creating a product or a service. But that wasn't that articulate, but I think you kind of know what I mean. If you think about each person inside of that organization as a unique system, you want to make sure that the system operates as effectively as possible. So each one of us brings unique skills and unique weaknesses, unique biases, unique thoughts into the organization. And so when DEI goes right, it's an acknowledgement of that and a way to empower people so that they work the best they can, and because they are now engaged and happy, they work the best with others that they can. So I had a boss at one point who said, your diversity of experience comes to the workplace as a diversity of thought. It's wonderful to have a diversity of thought because that's when you innovate, that's when you collaborate, that's when we have visionaries. So everything that you bring, that's your upbringing, your origin story, where you are right now, that manifests itself in your diversity of thought. That's that's not a bad way to think
No.
about it. And that, if you think about that, that also includes if I'm autistic or dyslexic, those are different ways to think and ways to solve problems too. So it opens a very broad, welcoming set of arms for people to thrive inside of a workplace. So that's when I think it goes right. Where I think it can get dicey, where I think it might break down
Mm-hmm.
is I think that a lot of times HR looks at what's the issue du jour, and then they're going to work on that. So, okay, we need to do something about DEI, so we're going to create a whole bunch of programs where, we're going to ask people to read certain books or go to certain activities, or we're going to create situations where people are going to confront each other. I think, but not really understanding what is needed in your own workplace. So I
Yeah.
think there are places when all of those things might be good, but this is not DEI is not a sort of like one size fits all. And I think you have to keep in mind why you're doing it in a workplace, right? So why you're doing it in a workplace is to make everybody feel like they can come to work and do their best work because we value them and we understand them. And not just, oh, I'm going to put a program in place. I'm going to put a different program in place. I think that's why, like, if you don't really believe that, if you don't really think about that as your why, that's when you get places that the minute they get a little pressure, they start rolling stuff back because the programs, they weren't really integrated into like why they matter at your particular company for your particular business. So that was very long-winded, but did it make sense?
It requires that, Ellen. It wasn't long-winded because I think it's a very sensitive topic. And I asked the question to be a bit controversial because I think there are a lot of, like, I mentioned boomers, sorry boomers, but I mentioned boomer owners and older Gen X owners that the second you mention those three letters, their eyes roll back into their head and they instantly go to woke culture. And I think this is where the messaging, and it's social media's fault, but it's where the messaging has really become twisted, and the propaganda has been just horrendous when it comes to that, because it's, if you ask, 1,000 people over the age of 50 who may be business owners or what have you, and you say, what does DEI mean to you? A lot of it's going to be negative because that just didn't exist back in the 80s, 70s, and 80s when they were growing up, especially in the workplace, right? And this is where where I had to learn. I mean, 7 or 8 years ago, I took a course through the University of Michigan online about diversity in leadership and the DEI workspace. And it was, I loved it because it explained it in such a way like you explained it. It's meant to bring people into an environment that have different backgrounds, regardless of race, gender, culture, whatever. It's really just to create a diversity of opinions, diversity of thought, diversity of ideas. This isn't about necessarily accommodations or things like that. And I would really like to see more messaging and more HR professionals or just people in general preaching the benefits of DEI in such a way. It's like religion. If you push religion down people's throats, Christianity, whatever have you, people are going to push back. Same thing with
Yeah.
DEI.
Yeah. And there are, at least in the States, there are laws in place to make sure that there's a strong floor, right? So there are discrimination laws in place. You
Sure.
can't not hire somebody because, you don't like their
Yeah.
age, race, color, whatever. And when HR people do the performance reviews and they look at salaries, there are at most companies, at good companies, they are looking for, well, are all the white guys in this department paid more than the women of color or
Yeah.
whatever? So there are balances behind the scenes as well that I think absolutely need to be there. Um, but what's forward facing to the whole employee base, I think should be, like you said, it should be about what you do so that everyone here feels like they can contribute equally, they're treated equally, and they can thrive.
Yeah. And I think it goes both ways when you say there needs to be balance. The balance needs to not swing too far the other way, where DEI supersedes merit, where DEI becomes a virtue signal, or even a a hiring practice. I'm treading on thin ice here when I say these things, but this is the way a lot of people feel. It's like, they support DEI, they support, having diversity of thought and engagement, but they also don't want it to supersede merit. What are your thoughts on that?
So I'm a few years older than you, not many years older than you, but um, I rem- I remember when I had managers say to me when this was just about women in the workplace, and
Right.
now women in the workplace are like 50% of all
Yeah.
employees. But I remember managers screaming at me saying, like, "So you're telling me I have to hire unqualified people and have to hire an unqualified person just because she's a woman?"
Yeah.
And I would say, "No, you don't have to hire an unqualified person. I'm going to give you resumes of all kinds of people. You need to think about each one of them. You need to consider each one of them equivalently and not dismiss somebody because they're a woman." And
Yeah.
so this has been around, this idea like, "Oh my gosh, you're going to make me, not hire the best." It just doesn't happen. I mean, it's a worry that I know lots and lots of people have, but merit shines. And so I've never seen this end up really playing itself out.
I've even read, I think there was a Harvard Business Review article on companies that have gone to nameless, faceless resumes, where people submit their resumes with no name, no addresses, even, anything that would indicate race, gender, geographical location, because that can also be a discriminatory thing. Uh, it's still early. It still remains to be seen whether that can be a successful way of doing things in terms of hiring people. But yeah, it's interesting. And once again, I want my audience to know that, like, I fully support DEI. I think there's people out there that just misunderstand it. And unfortunately, it's mostly because of social media and politics that has created this propaganda misunderstanding of really what DEI is supposed to do. So workplaces are interesting places,
Right.
and you work in them, daily. So let's talk about you. Let's talk about, your website. Let's promote, your social media, and really the message you'd like to get out there and where people can find you, Ellen.
So I'm doing two things right now in my consulting. One is I am working on good HR practices with companies, as you mentioned at the beginning of the podcast. And you can reach me at either ellen@peoplematter.llc.com, or you can just go to the website, peoplematterllc.com. And I'm also working with early career professionals, so Gen Z folks entering the workplace. If you want to reach out to me for that, you can also get there. There's a link or a tab on the People Matter website, and it says for early career professionals. And if you
Yeah.
click there, it will take you to how to reach me specifically for that.
Ellen Raim, I want to thank you very much for being here today. I love this topic. I love this conversation we had, and people can also find you on LinkedIn. That's where we really connected, and I love your posts. I think you eloquently explain, the Gen Z problem or gap, as we put it today, and really what HR professionalism is all about and how companies can really transform their HR. So thank you for being on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me. This was such a pleasure.